How do you reach a teenager's heart with the gospel? This is more than a question. It's the cry of many parents, grandparents and pastors. This is the topic we're going to explore with John T. Boston II, a specialist in youth evangelism. Today's topic, school-age evangelism. You're watching Ministry in Motion, where we explore best practices for your ministry in the 21st century. John, what's the way to a teen's heart?
I think the most effective method I have experienced in my own ministry is being authentic, admitting that what God has done in me, He can do in you. And that goes a long way with teenagers. Teenagers need to know that you don't attain perfection at some particular age in the future, but it in fact is a journey for all of us. And they can choose to be on that journey with Christ just like any other adult could.
Right, okay. So it's being real with the kids, it's showing yourself as a real person, even fallible?
Absolutely. Talking a little bit about some of the things without going into too much detail as to give the devil any glory, but to let them know I struggle with things as well. One of the most effective methods that I witnessed in my ministry over the past few years, working with teenagers primarily, it was my entire focus for the past few years, was that young people would often come to me, teenagers, and say, I appreciate that you shared that you were scared. I'm grateful that you talked about how you and your wife have challenges sometimes. I'm glad that you have questions in your faith journey, and that lets them know that where you are right now, while you will grow, you'll always face challenges until Christ comes to eliminate them completely.
Yeah. So who's best equipped and best positioned to reach a teen's heart?
It is one of my favorite questions, without fail. Mm-hmm. When I travel, parents will come to me and say, Pastor, could you please talk to my child? Or the chaplain, it'd be great if you could be a part of this. Or the pastor of the church, we need a youth emphasis here. We need someone to come in. But the very best evangelist for a teenager is their parent, their mother, their father, their guardian. Those persons in their life have the access to their hearts, stepping into their world, saying, you know what, I'd like to spend the day with you. Maybe the first conversation when you're trying to be the spiritual leader as a parent in the child's life is not to say, let's talk about the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. That might not be the best start, but a very strong start is going out, doing something that they enjoy. Go to the skate park, go fishing, spend time playing a game with them on the computer that they might enjoy. And instead of trying to condemn what they enjoy, say, you know what? This reminds me of something that I did when I was a child. Can make that connection, and you build that spiritual leadership in their life.
You seem to be describing here that the power of caring.
Absolutely.
So it's showing that interest, showing that care.
Yes, and you have to step into their world. I think it's very off-putting for teenagers when they're expected to rise to an occasion to be like the adults, mm-hmm. when they're not the adult. And oftentimes, even in our worship planning, we will say, you do this part of the service and you do this. It'd be a beautiful thing. If you want to see teenagers really come to life, how would you like to lead this worship experience? How would you like to see this ministry take place here in our local church or our local faith community? That's a powerful thing.
Yeah. So what does the pastor, what does the chaplain say to a parent to encourage them to reach out to their child? How do they approach that?
One of the things that we have to see ourselves, especially as spiritual leaders in our churches or in the Adventist Christian schools, what we have to do is we have to be able to see ourselves as coaches for the parents. Sometimes parents, I have an 8-year-old daughter. No one ever gave me a manual and said, this is what you do. And
join the club.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. Sometimes I try what my parents did, or we try what my wife's parents did, but when it comes down to it, I have to be my daughter daughter's parent uniquely. And that's what God called me to do. And I think as pastors and as chaplains, as local church leaders even, we have to be able to encourage our parents. You have been chosen by God. Just like Mary and Joseph were chosen to be responsible for making sure Jesus had the right home environment as he ministered here on earth. We have to provide that for our children. I think when they get that and they understand that, there's a sense of confidence in what they're doing as spiritual leaders in their child's heart.
Yeah. Now, it's easy for a parent, and let me make myself vulnerable here. I'm the father of 2 daughters, and they've recently just moved on from teenagehood. Mm-hmm. And during that period of time, as a parent, your relationship can fluctuate with your kids. Sure. There's times of closeness and where you feel bonded. Then there are times where you can feel a little distant. What would you say to a parent who feels as though they're not as close as they'd like to be with their child? How do they build those bonds?
Well, there are a lot of different ways that closeness begins to wane as children age. Maybe children have become distracted, maybe a traumatic experience. When that happens, one of the primary things is you have to go to God in prayer. You have to intercede. Mm-hmm. And for those that are already interceding, some of the practical things that you can do, first and foremost, begin to engage that child where they are. At 16, they're very different than they were when they were 12. And so begin to try to find new interests with the child, discover new things. I had one parent in particular, his child had an interest in Japanese culture. And so he decided, instead of organizing the family trip as he had always done, he sat with his teenage son and planned a trip to Japan. Everybody can't do that. That's phenomenal. That's amazing. But that child has not been the same since. Really powerful example of what it means to step into their life and their world.
So just looking for options and opportunities to connect is what I hear you saying.
Absolutely. And remembering that just like you're not the same as you were 10 years ago, they're not the same.
Okay. So when a teen does make a decision, how do we respond to that decision?
We have to respond in full earnest. I have a saying, we don't win in baptism, we win in follow-up. We have to have a very intentional, very precise effort to follow up in their life. First and foremost, as parents, we have to follow up. We have to nurture the spiritual journey, inviting family worship, even sending an encouraging text message, if that's as far as you can go at this point. As a local church, as spiritual leaders, as pastors and chaplains, we have to go on to nurture their journey. And the primary way to do that, young people don't meet Jesus in sermons. Young people meet Jesus in service. We have to create service opportunities for them to be the hands and feet of Jesus, because that's where young people hear the voice of God best.
Through service?
Through service.
And unpack that for me.
Sure. Well, for instance, there was a young lady who was struggling in her faith journey. She had attempted suicide. She was cutting. She was really dealing with her sense of identity. And what happened with her, we decided to encourage her to be a part of local ministry opportunities. If that meant serving the homeless, in her instance, that's what it was. She began to blossom. She began to say, I love this. I enjoy this. We began to ask her questions. What does it mean to you when you see the gratitude in their hearts? How do you see them? Are they still special to you even though they're homeless? And I said, well, what do you think how do you think God sees you? Are you still special to him? And that opened up a beautiful experience. And once you've got that service component involved in their life, they're really engaged, the next best step is to make sure they're discipling others. That particular young lady had not yet been baptized. She later got baptized, but since her baptism, she's led 4 others to baptism.
Wow.
Because she began to share her journey with her parents' permission because of the unique complexity of that situation. She shared, this is where I was. This is the dark place I came from. And in service, I began to hear God speak to my heart, and I'm a changed person now.
So you're describing here a neat situation where peer-to-peer evangelism takes place.
Absolutely.
And it's largely through service. Give us an example, exactly what you mean by service.
Well, I wouldn't say that leading out in the hymn of worship and a worship experience is service. What I'm talking about is getting involved in being a blessing in a ministry of compassion in other people's lives. So for me and my family, service for us is when my daughter goes to the hospital with me to visit people, to encourage them. That would be an example of service. Simple things, but also other examples of service. If you have a two-parent home, every home doesn't have that scenario, but as a mother, sit with your daughter and say, what could we do special for daddy this week? Or as a father and son, what could we do special for mom? Or what could we do for your brother? And that begins to open their hearts to what can be done as the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking about parents, there's typically a close connection between mother and children. Like, mothers are number one.
Sure.
Yeah. But fathers, talk me through that. That can be a tougher gig.
One of the things that is probably the hidden secret of the gospel work for reaching teenage hearts is getting a father involved in spiritual leadership in their lives. There's nothing more powerful than a father stepping towards their child and saying, would you mind if I lead a prayer for us today? Wow. Would it be okay if I ask God to bless you? And could you let me know how you want me to pray for you? That type of spiritual leadership is so far-reaching. It has been said that it's likely that families will follow when mothers make a decision for Christ, but almost without fail, nearly 100% of the time, in the high 90s, when fathers make a decision to follow Christ, the entire family follows. That's a powerful ministry.
It is. Now, I'd like to talk and hear you talk about the environment and almost the situation which is most conducive to teens to make a lifelong decision. And to create an environment that's not manipulative,
Sure,
but conducive to making that decision.
Absolutely.
What kind of environment do you like to work within?
Well, I work with a lot of different environments, and the funny thing is that I've been to rock-style environments, and
as in music,
okay. and I've been in worship environments and ministry environments that are very traditional. It's not the environment that makes the connection. It's the authenticity and the caring, the heart that the leaders have for the young people, making them central and primary in their focus for ministry. One chaplain in particular did something that I thought was really beautiful. Instead of making chapel something that the school leaders did for the children and put it on, he said, I would rather struggle through a few chapels and work with the young people to let them organize the worship experience. And I thought it was so interesting. They didn't want to rock out. They didn't want to have a mosh pit, which I'm not measuring that. But what I am saying is what they wanted to do was share testimonies.
Wow.
They wanted to have simple music so they could hear the words. They said the words are so powerful and meaningful. I sat in on that planning session and it moved me to tears because I thought they'd just go full throttle with all of these amazing inventions for impact.
Pushing every boundary.
But they wanted sincere, authentic encounter. That's what they wanted.
Sounds like the Holy Spirit to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And just listening as you were talking there, to me the environment, whether you're the rock environment, whether it's the nature rocks, rock climbing, or the music, it seems to be the environment created by the Spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So prayer, how important is prayer in all of this, John?
Prayer is important, but it's really critical. We have different language. Different parts of the world, people speak differently. Adults speak differently than teenagers. It's important to teach them how to pray, as Jesus taught his disciples. But it's also important to understand that their connection with Christ doesn't have to look the way ours looks. And that's critical. And so when you're praying, interceding is important, but teaching them to pray. Hey, could I share with you one of the ways that I talk to the Lord and one of the ways that I listen? But teaching listening is probably more important than teaching what to say.
Okay. Now, John, when we talk about evangelizing teens and that, we can often think of the context of teens that have grown up in the context of Christianity. But you've recently come from a background where you were reaching out and involved in ministries to teens who had no connection
Yes.
to any faith, let alone Christianity.
Sure.
Share with us, how did you operate, and how was that effective? How did you find effectiveness in that situation?
Well, Anthony, what I'm going to say is a bit dicey. So
Bring it on.
Okay. Well, in working with a school population with nearly 3,800 students in 10 different campuses in the northern part of New South Wales in Australia, 80% of the student population was not coming to our schools from a Seventh-day Adventist home. And the schools that I worked in particular, the majority of those, that 80%, had no faith affiliation at all.
Right.
What I found was in visiting homes when children would respond to appeals, because we were very aggressive about following up, we treated their response like it was gold and diamonds and rubies and everything worth anything. And when we would follow up with the homes where children were raised in an Adventist faith community, most oftentimes the parents would say, my child's just not ready. They're still not making their bed. They're still not waking up in time. They're just not ready to make that kind of commitment to Christ. I will say this though, 100% of the families that had no faith affiliation said, I fully support my child. Tell me what I need to do to be a part of their journey.
Am I hearing you correctly that it was the non-Christian families that were more receptive
Absolutely.
than the Christian families?
Absolutely. The values that Christianity present. When we present Christianity, sometimes the wrapper changes, but the core of it doesn't change. And to know that someone loves you and cares for you, when teenagers can find their identity in Jesus Christ, it is the most powerful movement that can take place in the home. And that has a trickle effect. Consistently, when teenagers made decisions to follow Christ, mothers followed, fathers followed, siblings, cousins, neighbors, friends followed.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Now, I want to pick up on something. As you were talking there, you described going and visiting the homes of teens with their families.
Sure.
How were you received? Were there times when they said, hey, we're sending the kids to this Christian school, but not so close, buddy?
Sure. Well, because we take the decision very seriously, we have to go and visit. We want to make sure the parent knows. We don't say, hey, your child is getting baptized and they're going to be Adventists and congratulations. That's a bad, we probably learned the bad way to not do that, especially in Australia.
Okay, yeah.
But what we did do is we would go and say, we had this week of worship where there was this special chapel experience. We made an appeal for those that wanted to accept Christ. Your child responded. We want to let you know, we'd like to support your child's journey. What would you like us to do next? This is what we can do, but what would you like us to do next? And 100% of the time, not 99, 100% of the time, I fully support it. Let me know what I need to do next.
Right, okay. Now, there are people in our churches who have a burning desire to see teens, young adults make a lifelong decision for Jesus. And they may not be parents, or their children might have grown. But how do you get an intergenerational type of evangelistic arrangement going? What's the best way to get that going?
Well, it's to step away from the board table, step away from the committee planning session, and actually go and mentor some young people. Being a present voice in the lives of young people has far-reaching influence. And that can be a passive mentoring. It doesn't have to be a formal, we're going to meet every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Passively mentoring, sending a text message, an email, I'm checking in on you. Hey, let's go get something to eat in a safe way, in a safe environment. And doing that passive mentoring, being present, that does something in their lives that can't be really fully measured. That's how I surrendered my heart to Christ. I had a lot of people who took a vested interest in my journey. And because of that, I saw that they thought my journey was important. So I took my journey seriously with Christ.
Okay. And wow, I'd like to pick up on that. Thanks so much for joining us for today's program. Today we looked at school-age evangelism with John T. Boston II. And this is what we discovered. First of all, teenagers want you to be honest and authentic with them. Secondly, the best evangelist to a teenager is their parent. Third, step into their world, genuinely care, and then connect. Our fourth point is, When a teenager makes a decision for Christ, parents and pastors need to be very intentional in their discipleship journey. The fifth point, service opportunities are a powerful way for young people to meet Christ beyond the sermon. And our sixth point, a father exemplifying spiritual servant leadership has far-reaching effects on the family. And seven, making personal loving appeals are a way to lead young people to a life of service. Thanks so much for joining us on Ministry in Motion today, and may God richly bless you.